Welcome. Welcome to a conversation. And this is a conversation that you are invited to participate in, even though you're out there in video land, as they say. And we are glad you could come and be a part of this. And we are glad also for these two persons who have come to be with us, Laurie Borden and Shirley Ryan. Both come from Hospice Volunteer Services. I'll let you start by telling what you do
Okay.
in this.
I'm Shirley Ryan, and I am the Administrative Director of Hospice Volunteer Services. I started with the agency 11 years ago, and basically bringing attention to end-of-life issues and patient care for hospice patients.
Okay.
And I'm Laurie Borden, and I started at Hospice Volunteer Services on February 1st of this year. So I'm new to the program. I'm the program assistant. I work with Priscilla Baker, who's the program director, and Margaret Olson is the fourth staff member in our office. She is our bereavement counselor.
Good.
Yeah.
So, what are the stories that brought you to Hospice Volunteer Services?
Well, I guess the stories vary for different people, but for me, I believe it was probably my experience with my dad, who died in 2004 as a hospice patient, and he had excellent care, and so that piqued my interest, and it started as it does for a lot of volunteers, just wanting to give back.
Well, I came when my father died suddenly in 2006. Same. It was a very sudden death, and so I didn't have the opportunity to say goodbye. And that was more impactful on my life than I realized. And so I was searching for some sort of meaning to this kind of loss, and how do I go on when I wasn't able to express myself to the person that I love so much. And so I started the hospice volunteer training, and there I learned a lot about death and dying, the people in the community, about myself. That really led me to say, this is something that I could see myself doing on a regular basis. So it was that, and I was particularly called to the vigil sitting piece of that, which is when you sit with someone who is actively or almost actively dying. So it's that deep and rich experience that really helped me not get over the death of my dad, but get through it. So I'm really grateful that I've been able to do that.
Thanks for sharing your stories. In our previous conversation, I think there was something said that went like this: when you are willing to be vulnerable, people often open up. Can you talk a little bit about that? What does that mean?
Well, I think when volunteers go into a home situation or a family situation, wherever the patient may be, whether it's a home setting or a nursing home or wherever it is, just to being vulnerable means sharing our own stories and being very open and very honest about that. Just is inviting stories from families and patients, and also being able to listen with a new perspective that maybe people haven't had. We don't know the patients that we go in to see, so everything is new and fresh for us to hear, and it's very impactful.
Yeah, I think when I was actually vigil sitting, the very first experience I had, I walked into the room, and my dad was a fisherman, and that's actually how he died. He was coming home from a nighttime fishing trip and lost control of the car. But the first time I went into a bedroom of someone who was actively dying, there was a picture over his bed that was a fly fisherman in the middle of a stream with his creel and his wide brim hat and fishing. And I found out that the family was using the term going fishing to lead their father on his way out. There's very often a term that's used that people feel comfortable with, because he was a fisherman as well. And I was just so struck by the picture that looked so much like my father, and the patient's name was actually one of my dad's nicknames. So as I sat there, I quietly whispered my story about how my dad had died and how I had never gotten to say goodbye, and how we had enjoyed fly fishing together, and the patience and love he showed to me when he was trying to teach me. And so as I was quietly saying this, I realized that the connection, that vulnerable connection between the two of us, his daughter was in the next room getting some sleep, and I did say how much I loved my dad, and I said, I can see your daughter loves you just as much as I loved my dad. And all of a sudden we were trained to listen for sounds that the patient makes in their breathing, and I heard that sound, and I immediately called the nurse, and she went and got the daughter, and I slowly walked out, and 15 minutes later she was able to be with her father as he passed. And you know, I realized not only did I get a gift of being able to say goodbye to my father, but she was also able to be there with her father. So it's that raw vulnerability that opens us to life, really, not just the death.
And so many times, like for you, it was the picture over the bed is an instant connection. And so many times we, or any of our volunteers, will walk into a room and get some little spoken or unspoken connection. It happens so often that it's wonderful, and it's very rewarding, and the connection is made, and we are vulnerable. We're able to be vulnerable, and I think that's part of, you know, the gift. But it's amazing. It's an amazing journey.
It's amazing stories. Thank you. There were two other words that were in that conversation. One was permission, and the other one was space. Is that? That sounds like. Can you describe that?
I think as volunteers, one thing that we do is hold the space, whether it's for the family or for the patient. They have allowed us to come into this very sacred space. The process of dying is a natural one that is people are afraid of, but shouldn't be, because it can be very peaceful. And even when it's not peaceful, it's a sacred space. So they've allowed us to come in and simply be a witness to their life. And so it's that journey that we're allowed to be a part of that validates the life of that person and that person's story, whether it's the verbal story that they are able to tell us before they die, or it's the nonverbal story of a picture on the wall or their life review that you know they're doing quietly within.
Exactly. Sometimes the story is not spoken, and it's just a sense that that we get, and perhaps the patient gets, and the family gets, of just support and caring. So sometimes it's a very, you know, silent encounter, but it's very powerful, and there's still a story going on.
There was a phrase we talked about had to do with caring, about a hospice way of caring. I thought that was a very helpful kind of an interesting line. Does that? I'm hearing that in what you're saying. Is there more you want to say about that? What does caring mean for, in terms of the training, for example, of hospice volunteers? Can you talk about that?
I think humans are naturally caring organisms. We want to care for each other, but especially with death and dying, we're afraid of it, or we don't know what to say or what to do. The hospice training allows us to see we're all in the same position. They haven't come up with a cure for death yet. We're all going to die. We're all going to experience that. And so I think we don't realize it, but we gravitate towards wanting to care for others. And hospice patients in particular are very isolated because of that fear. They may not have family. And so for a hospice volunteer to be able to go in and instantly have this relationship of, I am here to care about you, not care for you. We're not doing any of the medical work. We're just caring about you, and we're willing to be here for you. That's a rich gift each is giving each other.
And we meet them where they are. There's no judgments. It's just wherever they are when we go in the room. We basically give them permission to be who they are. And you're right, it's a rich experience for all. Not that all encounters are amazing. Some of them are some nitty-gritty and some challenges. But overall,
there's the word.
The challenges, yes. But overall, the training just teaches us to listen and how to listen and how to be heard, sometimes without speaking, and that's the gift.
One of the phrases I think of was the reminder that it's not as a volunteer, it's not about you. Exactly. It's about the person who is here and that you've come to be with.
Exactly.
And that's an important reminder every day, I think, for all of us in our relationships with each other.
Sometimes when we go into a home, we have our own beliefs or preconceived notions, and they're left at the door. Sometimes we do get those marvelous gifts, like the painting, the fisherman. But you're correct. It's not about us. We park that at the door, unless the situation in the family and the patient invites that piece in. But it is definitely about the patient.
And you never know what to expect. We do intakes. We go to a family's home and we talk to the patient and the family to see how volunteers can help them. And I had an experience where I went in and was talking with the husband and wife, but of course the wife was doing all the talking, and the husband was just sitting and listening from the side, and she thought he was asleep, I guess. And I got to the end of the spiel, and all of a sudden he piped up and he said, "So what are you selling me again?" And I said, "Well, we're selling you peace of mind." And he said, "Well, so how much is it going to cost me?" And I said, "Nothing." And he said, "Oh, good, because I was going to give you a piece of my mind." And so you want to normalize the situation too. There's still room for humor and laughter and silliness and all those things that sometimes go by the wayside.
And as hospice volunteers, we laugh with patients, we cry with patients, we pray with patients, and we sit silently. It's you never know. It's genuine bonds and friendships are formed, sometimes in a matter of a few weeks and sometimes spread over several months. And if we can... 4 years. We've had
4 years?
We've had some patients for 2 years, 3 years.
Yes, end up just staying with us, and it's wonderful.
Maybe you could talk a little bit about how person becomes a volunteer. What are the steps? If you say to yourself, I really would like to be a volunteer, so what happens?
First step is to come into the office, we're in the Marble Works, and speak with one of us about why you would like to do this. And then there's a registration for the class. It's a 10-week class. And it is not a workshop, it's a training program, because the assumption is that at the end of the training program you will become a volunteer, committing 1 to 3 hours a week to spend with patients. And that fits into the individual schedule, of course. But the 10-week course is 3 hours for consecutive evenings, and You learn everything about the hospice services here in Addison County. You meet the other players in end-of-life care here. You learn a lot about yourself through reflection and exercises, role-playing, films. We just have a variety of different ways that we help to get people prepared for this kind of work. So,
and that when that's all done, then what happens?
Well,
And the training is
okay, so one of the administrative parts is, because it's a vulnerable population, there's the necessary background checks, and which we perform, and then there's a exit interview, which Laurie and Priscilla conduct with each and every volunteer. Now, a class is generally 20 to 24 people, and so then there'll be an extensive exit interview, and then the volunteer basically is ready for the first assignment. So, and the assignments are matched to patients to volunteers, and somewhat logistically for mileage, and that's it.
And then how does all this get reported? And I mean, how does it? I'm a volunteer. How do I tell you what has happened and where I've been and the time and so forth? How does that go?
yeah, it depends on the volunteer and what kind of communication means they want to use. Most people will email after they visited with someone. They send in a brief report to Priscilla and myself. And of course, everything is very confidential, so even in our emails, we don't use any names. They're always abbreviations. And they write a brief report, or they may call us, or they may stop by the office and report what's going on. We like to be a support system for the volunteers. If there's any concerns or challenges or questions, we walk them through it. And then at the end of the month, each volunteer submits an activity report, which includes their mileage, how many hours, what kind of visits they were doing, and how many hours they spent for the month. And then we tabulate that and keep track of that each and every month.
And the necessary part of that, it's all collated and analyzed for grant funding and reporting to home health for activity reports. But so
once you become a volunteer, is there additional training, or is there opportunities to meet?
We have periodic in-services that volunteers will be notified of, and they will range on a variety of topics, trending topics of interest to our volunteers. We do have some workshops on creative means, and we have perhaps 5 a year at most, probably, of those types of in-services available to all the volunteers.
And you have quite a few volunteers?
We have about 120 at any given time, not all totally active. There are people that are here just seasonally, and so they go off, but it's sort of a rolling list of volunteers that are available. We probably have anywhere from 29 to 35 who are active in a given month with our patients. No, excuse me, 60. We have 30, about 30 patients, about 60 active volunteers to cover those patient needs.
Right.
Yeah.
And our volunteer list does, as Laurie said, between 120 and perhaps 200 volunteers, and that are available.
The other thing we do for volunteers is have a memorial service or ritual, because you become close to these patients. And so when they die, we like to bring volunteers in for candle lighting and remembrances so that we can share. Often a patient will have a team of volunteers, 2, 3, 4, 5, who have been intercommunicating with each other for a period of time too. So it's nice to have that group come in and talk. about the individual that they've all lost in their life.
And sometimes when a patient has a larger team like that, and if the assignment, if you want to call it that, goes on for an extended period of time, or if there are difficulties, that group, that team will meet to just brainstorm or debrief or just help support each other. And always in the office, if volunteers are encouraged to reach out to the office if they have any concerns of any type after a visit or before going to a visit, and we're there to support volunteers in whatever way they need.
And hear their stories.
And hear their stories.
Their stories are absolutely wonderful that they can share.
Good. What else would you like to say about, now we've talked about all the mechanics and all the procedures and so forth. I don't want to take us away from, that's very important and that's very helpful. But what else might you want to say that I didn't ask you about your experience as working with hospice?
I think the volunteers come with a variety of backgrounds. My own background was not death phobic. I remember as a young child, my dad lifting me up to the casket of my mother's grandfather, and a man that I had seen a few times and I adored, but he was a little more removed, and encouraging me that it was okay to look at him and to touch him and to just say goodbye to him. And so that's how I was raised, not being afraid of death, but just acknowledging it. Some volunteers and a lot of people in our culture are not raised so openly acknowledging, death.
Yeah, number of young adults who have never been to a funeral.
Yes.
You must experience that too, right?
It's a very touch-oriented, and I don't necessarily mean physically touching, but the way that volunteers and patients and family members touch each other. Again, it's a give and take. It's not a we're coming in to help you. It's a mutual kind of relationship. And someone said the last good thing that may happen in a person's life is a hospice volunteer. Because there are some people who just don't have that kind of support system or family, and to me that sort of says it in a nutshell, that people deserve the kind of love and care and touch that these volunteers are willing to provide.
Do you find folks who, when they first are approached by someone about hospice, they pretty much turn that off?
It's a scary term for some people, a number of people actually. Some people associate hospice with there's no hope, it's the end, and it's actually the opposite. Hospice is hope, and it is relationships, and it is support, and it can be very good and supportive for the family, for the patient, and all the structures that family needs. To me, it's sad when a family or a patient signs on to hospice, a day before they die, because they could have had, or we could have made a connection, and possibly, just possibly, it could have been just a little bit helpful. So,
yeah, we all, I'm sure, can remember family members or friends who say, we don't talk about death. We don't bring that up. And is that changing, do you think? And
slowly.
Yeah.
Slowly, that's part of one of our prongs of our mission is education, public education, and about death and dying. And it is very difficult for people, all of us, to talk about death. But we're hoping that with conversation, people will become more accustomed to talking about it, more acceptance of talking about it, and be prepared. It's a good thing.
Yes, it is a good thing.
Yes.
Are there other things that you'd like to say before we we come to the end of our time?
I think the one thing that is, I guess maybe that I'm aware of as administrative person, is just knowing, or for the public to know, for the community to know that Addison County Home Health and Hospice and Hospice Volunteer Services are two different agencies. We work very, very closely together, and we want every patient's journey with both agencies to be seamless, but there's great confusion, and so we do sometimes get lost in that shuffle, and that's...
So those are questions that can be asked by calling your office?
Yes.
Or calling the other office?
Yes. Yes, we each have a role, but we work very, very closely together, and yes.
Good.
Yeah, we're always available for people who just want to talk, as you said, talk. I mean, it's by sharing the stories, I think, that we get more comfortable with this topic, and the more we become comfortable with it, the more prepared we're going to be, and therefore, hopefully, satisfying people's wishes and values and needs as they approach the end of their life.
Well,
And we've deliberately created an atmosphere in our office of, you know, anyone can walk in at any time and talk to us about whatever they're thinking or feeling or questions, and we will have time for that person. We'll make time to sit down as they just walk in the door. We want people to have their questions answered. We want them, if they come in for bereavement, we want to give them an immediate answer of some sort. And families or family members, you know, something that they need at that point. So we invite people to stop into our office just to ask that question, or as they're walking by.
good.
We have a website as well.
We have a website?
Yes.
Okay.
www.hospicevs.org.
.org.
Yeah.
Okay. And the phone number is?
388-4111.
Now that should be easy to remember.
Yes.
I want to thank you very much for coming and for sharing. We've covered a lot of territory, a lot of ground, and I
Yes.
hope that this has been helpful to you, and I know it will be helpful to folks out there who are listening to this particular tape. And please note that these folks really are very, very good at the work that they do and the care that they give. And so please, if you have need of or questions, please contact the hospice office. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
We've enjoyed this time.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for being in on our conversation today.